In this tutorial, we're going to discuss the basic workflow for static meshes. Alright, so up to this point you should have created a basic building like this using BSP brushes. Now in between lessons I went ahead and added a few more windows, and I added a staircase to lead up to my door in the front, and then I also added a large window in back and a door in the back as well with a staircase. Now we're going to continue working on this by adding static meshes to our scene. Okay, so the static mesh workflow starts out with the content browser. In order to add static meshes, we need to make sure that we are in one of our content folders, okay, and then we need to do a search to kind of filter down what we're looking for. So in my case, we're looking for a window. Okay, so I've typed that in there, and then I've also filtered it out to only look for static meshes. Okay, now if you want to clear out a search, you simply hit clear, and that will go ahead and look for all objects in the folder that you have selected in your packages. So let's go ahead and type in window, and then I'm going to go to skeletal or static meshes. Okay, and then there we go. Now you'll notice that I have several objects in here that have window tagged. Okay, and what I can do is double click on any one of those to bring up my static mesh editor and to get a better idea of what that looks like. Now in your static mesh editor, you're going to get a little bit of stats on your object. So you're going to get your triangle count, your vertex count, and how many UV channels you have, and even an approximate size of your object. This is going to be very helpful for you. Now, once we've kind of got an idea of what this looks like and we've decided on it, we can go ahead and close this down. Now I know that there are several other properties here that we could discuss in this course, but we really don't need to get into any of this at this point, as it's not important to the core features of UDK at this point. So we're going to go ahead and close that down, and we're going to go ahead and drag and drop our static mesh into our scene. So let's go ahead and raise this up, and I want to rotate this object to where it fits into this window spot right here. So I'm going to hit spacebar, and that's going to toggle to my rotation tool. Now if I continue to hit the spacebar, it's going to toggle to my scale tool and then back to my move tool. And then if I hit it one more time, we're back around to our rotate tool. So let's rotate this 90 degrees. And then I'm also going to rotate it in the Y 90 degrees. Now let's hit spacebar to go to our move tool, and you'll notice that I'm in my local reference coordinate system space. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and place this here. That's kind of why that move tool looks a little funky. Alright, so let's close our content browser, and I'm going to place this in my space here. Now moving this around in the orthographic views can be a little difficult while working in local space. So if you want to try and get this positioned roughly in your perspective view, that's going to work out a little bit better. Now if you can't work in this way, make sure you switch that back to world, and then you can move this around easier. Alright, so looking at this, it looks like my window is going to be centered up right here along my window seal. Now the reason that it's doing that is because I've set my drag grid settings to 4. Now if you're set to 16, that might be a little difficult to do because it's in the middle of that window seal. So set that to 4. That'll give you enough grid spaces to where you can center this window up right in that area. Alright, so once that is set, let's go ahead and drag this up in our Z direction, okay, our world Z direction, and let's make sure that that is lined up along the top, and along the bottom it's a little tall. Okay, you can see that our window seal is kind of cutting that off there. So what we need to be able to do at this point is scale our geometry and scale our static meshes. Now this workflow can be a little tricky because scaling can get you into a lot of trouble. What it will do is it could get the mesh off of that grid, and that's going to be very difficult to begin lining everything up in your scene, as we're going to be working with curved objects and we're going to be working with angled objects and things like that. So whenever you're scaling, you want to pay a special attention to that object. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to scale this, but I don't need to scale it in my Y or my X direction, okay, because I already have that set up. I want to go ahead and switch this to my local direction really quickly because this is going to be helpful when we start scaling. I want you to notice the direction of the objects because whenever you start scaling them, it's going to scale them in their local direction. Okay, so I need to scale this window in my X direction because that's pointing up and down. Okay, so let's grab our scale tool, and this is our uniform scale. So if I scale this on any handle, it's going to scale it in all directions, and I don't want that. So I'm going to hit Control Z. What I want to do is I want to scale it in the X direction for my window. So what I can do with that scale tool selected is I can come down here to my input boxes and type in a value for my X, my Y, and my Z. Now you'll also have another input box, and this is the very first one, and this is for X, Y, and Z. So this will allow you to type in a uniform scale value. Okay. Now I don't need that at this point, and I just need my X value. So what I'm going to do is resize this. Now whenever resizing, there are what's called safe values. Now safe values start out at the very base of 1.0, which is what we start out with, 0.75, 0.5, and 0.25. Okay, so you might want to write these down. Now whenever you begin to cut those values in half, you get 1.0, 0.75, 0.5, 0.375, which is half of 0.75, 0.25, 0.1875, 0.125, 0.0625, 0.03125. Okay, now those values there are going to be your safe values, and you might want to go ahead and make a note of those values because whenever we are scaling, we're going to start out with those base safe values, so 1.0, 0.75, 0.5, 0.25. Okay, and then we'll begin to add some of those secondary values, which sounded like really long and weird numbers, to scale these properly. And then what this is going to do is it's going to make sure that your static mesh edges are always going to be on the grid. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So let's take a look at our good example. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this window at 0.75. Now look what happens. Okay, it scales down, and I could go ahead and I can move this up and try to get that to touch along the bottom of the window seal, and notice that that lines up perfectly. But take a look at the top of your window seal. We're still a little too short. Okay, so let's try a different value. Now remember, our base values were 1.0 and 0.75. Now we didn't actually have a value of like 0.8 or anything like that. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to take 0.75 and we need to add one of those secondary values. So what I'm going to add is going to be 0.0625. So if you add that up, that's going to be 0.8.125. So 7.5 plus 0.0625 equals 0.8125. And if you hit enter, you can now come in here and you can grab that move tool. You can line that up to the bottom of the window seal here. Okay, notice that fits the grid perfectly. And then it's also perfect right here at the top. Okay. Now with meshes like this window seal, okay, it may not be as big a deal to scale it perfectly using these safe values. Okay. Now with something like a wall object, okay, if I were to come in here, let me just grab one really quickly. Let me just type in wall. If I were to bring in a wall into my scene, we would want to create a long expanse of a wall. Now what I could do is I could scale this and make it larger and longer, but that's not always the case. So what I could do is duplicate this. So let me move this out just to give this an example. If I hold down Alt and duplicate this out, notice how it perfectly snaps from one end to another. Okay. Now if I start to scale this object, okay, let me go ahead and delete this one. Let me set my grid snap to 16 again, just to make this go a little bit faster. Now if I scale this in all three directions, let me scale this up to I'm not even sure what it is. It looks like 1.3045 right now. Okay, let me go ahead and grab my move tool and duplicate this. So if I hold down Alt and start to drag this out and it starts snapping, notice that we get this little bit of a gap here. It's not matching up properly. Okay, now I could go ahead and turn off my snapping, but that's going to quickly get you into a lot of trouble in UDK. Okay, it does match up properly, but look, it's off the grid. Okay, so let's go to our side view and really just take a look at that. So where those points meet up, they're off the grid, and as a matter of fact, they're not even really lined up properly. So whenever scaling, it's always good practice to use those safe values. Alright, so now that we have learned the basics of using static meshes, what I want you to do in between lessons is to kind of get creative on adding in more of these window objects in these spaces. Now I'm just going to add these windows along the front and along the back. I'm not going to add those across the top because I'm going to step you through that process as well. Alright, so I'll see you in the next lesson.